Have you ever wondered what really happens when a perfect marriage suddenly falls apart? What if the person everyone blamed was actually telling the truth all along? Stay until the end, because the real story behind this celebrity divorce will completely shock you. Everyone thought they had the perfect marriage. Two famous television presenters who worked together every single day. They smiled at each other across the breakfast table while millions watched. They laughed at the same jokes. They finished each other's sentences. For over 20 years, they seemed unshakable. Then one day, they announced their divorce. No warning, no scandal, no public fights. Just a simple statement saying it was over. And the world was stunned. One of them spoke first. Their version sounded calm and reasonable. They said the marriage had simply run its course. Two people who grew apart naturally. It happens. No one's fault. Just sad. And because this person had always seemed sensible and mature, everyone believed them immediately. The other person said absolutely nothing. And that silence felt like guilt. People started asking questions. Why aren't they defending themselves? What are they hiding? Surely, an innocent person would speak up. The assumptions grew darker every day. Maybe they cheated. Maybe they were emotionally abusive. Maybe their silence meant they deserved everything bad people were saying. By the time the silent person was ready to talk, it was too late. Public opinion had already decided who the villain was. But what if everything we thought we knew was completely wrong? What if that silence was hiding something much more complicated than guilt? Let me take you back to how this all began. These two people didn't just fall in love. They built their entire relationship on camera. They met at work, fell in love at work, got married while working together, then spent decades broadcasting their relationship to millions of viewers every morning. At first it was probably real. They had genuine moments, real conversations, true affection. But when being charming together becomes your actual job, something changes. You learn which stories get laughs. You practice which looks the camera loves. You perform happiness so often that you forget what real happiness feels like. They became experts at looking perfect together. But looking perfect and being happy are two completely different things. Nobody suspected anything was wrong because nothing ever looked wrong. They never fought in public. There were no scandals, no rumors. Just two people who had been together so long that everyone assumed they'd be together forever. But staying together isn't the same as being in love. Sometimes it's just habit that's lasted long enough to feel permanent. When the divorce was announced, one person immediately controlled the narrative. Not through dramatic interviews, but through friends who spoke to journalists. Through carefully worded statements that sounded mature and dignified. They positioned themselves as the reasonable one, the person who tried, the person who stayed as long as they could. And it worked perfectly. Everyone sympathized with them. Meanwhile, the other person's silence became damning. Every day they didn't speak, people assumed the worst. But here's what nobody knew. That silence wasn't guilt. It was survival. Because the silent person knew that anything they said would be twisted. That the media would turn their words into headlines that fit whatever story sold best. So staying quiet felt safer than speaking. But silence has a terrible cost. Friends stopped reaching out because they didn't know what to believe. Colleagues became distant. The public decided they must be hiding something awful. And the person who spoke first never had to accuse them of anything specific. They just had to stay calm while the other person's silence made them look guilty. This is the trap of public breakups. The person who speaks first often wins. Because by the time the other person is ready to talk, everyone has already made up their mind. But what was really happening behind closed doors? What was the silent person actually hiding? The truth is so much darker than anyone imagined. The real problem started with chronic pain. It began as a stiff back, something that should have gotten better with rest. But it didn't. It got worse. It spread until it controlled everything. How they sat, how they stood, whether they could sleep or work or just exist without constant suffering. Their independence disappeared. Suddenly, they needed help with basic things. Getting dressed, going places, managing daily life, and their partner stepped in to help. At first it looked like love, like devotion. They researched medical treatments, booked doctors, organized medications, managed everything. But here's where things got twisted. Because when one person controls everything, when they make all the decisions, when the sick person depends on them completely, the relationship stops being equal. It becomes something else. Care slowly turned into control. The healthy partner started deciding which events were too tiring, which friends could visit, and for how long, what the sick person was capable of doing. And because it was all framed as concern, as protection, it was impossible to push back without seeming ungrateful. This is how control hides inside care. Every boundary crossed gets justified as help. Every choice taken away gets explained as being for your own good. The sick person found themselves asking permission for things that should have been their own decision. Their world got smaller and smaller. Most contact with the outside world had to go through their partner first. And everyone watching thought it was beautiful. They praised the healthy partner for their patience, for staying, for sacrificing so much. But the sick person was realizing something terrifying. They were trapped. The house they shared stopped feeling safe. It felt like a prison where every word and movement was watched. The healthy partner always seemed to know what they were doing, who they were talking to. They would appear during phone calls, ask questions about conversations they shouldn't have heard. And when this was mentioned, it was explained as natural concern. How could they not pay attention when help might be needed at any moment? So the sick person learned to edit themselves, to stay quiet, to make themselves smaller and smaller to avoid tension. Then came the moment that changed everything. The sick person was resting upstairs when they heard their partner on the phone downstairs, talking to a friend. And the tone was completely different, relaxed, casual, cold. They were describing their spouse like a burden, talking about the pain like an inconvenience, the needs like they were excessive. There was no love in that voice, no concern, just contempt. And the sick person sat there frozen, realizing that everything they thought was real was actually a performance. The devoted caretaker, the sacrificing partner, all of it was a lie. When the divorce was announced, the public statement revealed nothing, just polite words asking for privacy. The person who had been the caretaker continued being praised for their grace. The sick person stayed silent because they knew no one would believe them anyway. How do you explain that care turned into control? That help became a cage? That the person everyone admires for staying actually made you feel like you were suffocating? You can't. Because it sounds like you're making excuses. Like you're the villain trying to rewrite history. But eventually the silent person did speak. Not in tabloids, but in quiet conversations with trusted journalists. They didn't make accusations. They just described what it felt like. To lose yourself inside a relationship. To become so dependent you forget you were ever a whole person. To realize that the care you were grateful for was actually resentment dressed up as duty. Some people started to listen, started to wonder if maybe the story was more complicated. But many others dismissed it completely, said they were lying, playing the victim, trying to destroy their ex's reputation. And maybe that's inevitable. Maybe once people believe a story, the truth doesn't matter anymore. But here's what this story teaches us. That strength without limits can destroy the people we claim to love. That care can quietly become control if we're not careful. That perfect relationships on television might be anything but perfect in real life. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell your truth, even when you know most people won't believe you. Because living inside someone else's lie is worse than standing alone in your own truth. The next time you see a couple that looks perfect from the outside, remember this story. You never really know what's happening behind closed doors. If this opened your eyes to something new, hit that subscribe button because we bring you the untold stories that change how you see everything.